Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. After a brief hiatus, we're back with a contest crew. This is the week after the IARU HF Championship, so I thought we'd jump right into that. I think there's been an interesting series of events that happened this past weekend. But before we get into that, Randy, would you just do what you usually do and go through the rules and what makes the IARU HF unique?
Sure. To start with, glad to be back on. The IARU HF Radio Sport or World Championship, I don't know, I can never remember the name. We just call it the IARU. Is a 24-hour contest. Anybody can work anybody. You get 1 point for working someone in your same ITU zone. You get 3 points for working somebody in the same continent but a different ITU zone, and you get 5 points for working somebody outside of your continent. So it's a DX contest. The way the points are set up, you want to work guys in another continent as much as you can. The multiplier is the number of ITU zones that you work on each band. And then also, as an interesting twist and something that really ties the contest back into all the national IRU radio societies, is that each society can have can activate a headquarters station. And so another multiplier in addition to the ITU zones is headquarters stations. And in some ways this has changed. The contest used to just have zones only, and then when the headquarters stations were introduced, it changed things a little bit because it makes it a much more Eurocentric contest. There's more countries in Europe, therefore more headquarters, that kind of thing. But it's an interesting contest. It's both phone and CW, so activity kind of all over the place. And it's a lot of fun because you have to cover a lot more territory than you do in most contests. But thank goodness it's only 24 hours, so it doesn't beat you up quite as bad as the fall and spring contests do.
And it is a WRTC qualifier?
Absolutely. And a matter of fact, because the WRTC usually happens in conjunction with the IRU contest, it's 1,000 points. So it's a maximum potential score for qualifying. So saw a lot of guys on this weekend strictly for that reason, myself included. I probably would have only done about half the time. Summer contests there's so much more fun things to do outside, but it was like it's worth too much to skip.
Well, I'm curious about that, Randy. Given that it's a mid-July contest, are there less operators on?
I think there is less people active in the summer than there are in the winter. It just kind of makes sense. In the winter, the weather's crummy, or the days are shorter. There's just so much more reason to just turn on the radio and see what's going on. In the summertime, I always have everything disconnected due to lightning storms and that kind of thing. So it takes some effort to get back on the air, and then just other things going on in life. So I say there's just less general activity. I think if you listen on the bands, you would notice kind of the same thing, but contest definitely brings people out. So the bands were plenty busy during the weekend.
And Dan, what could you add to Randy's perspective about the IARU?
Well, I think that for sure that the IARU is one of the best contests out there. I like the fact that it is that multi-mode. It takes a lot of skill to be able to place highly in this one, and that's both on phone and CW. And there's not a lot of major DX contests where that actually is the case. And so that's one of the major motivating factors for me, is that you have to showcase your abilities on both modes. You can't just be good on CW or just good on phone. You got to be able to do them both if you want to do well in this contest. That's what really drives me in this one.
So let's jump into that, Dan, starting with you. What are the specific tactics?
Every year is a little bit different. So one of the big things, so I operated from ND7K again, as usual. One of the big issues we have at that station is the fact that it's the middle of summer in Arizona. And when I got there on Friday, the temperature was 113 degrees. And the problem that Tim has out there is the fact that he has an equipment shed where all of the switching stuff lives. And we did have an issue a couple of years back when I did the IARU from out there where everything kind of overheated. We had some issues there. So that was definitely on my mind going in. Now, luckily, the temperature went down a little bit on Saturday and into Sunday, I think it was 109 instead of 113, but that's actually going in the right direction. And so I was very fortunate that Tim was actually at the station with me, and we were able to, throw a couple of fans into the equipment shed. So equipment-wise, that was my big fear going in, but it turned into nothing. Everything worked great during the contest.
So beyond the equipment, when you have what seems to me a rather complicated scoring scheme, combined with the fact that you can be on both phone and CW, how are you planning the contest, Dan?
This is a very CW-centric contest. You're always going to find better rates on CW. The hardest part is to figure out when to go to phone. And that's also true for actually operating WRTC. And we found that over, I've done it several times now. And that's always the hardest part, because when you go to phone, the rate's not there right away. You have to wait for somebody to spot you. And then once you get spotted, you're good to go. But sometimes that can take quite a while. So going into it, we already know that CW is going to play a gigantic role in this. Probably at least 75% of the queues were going to be CW, 25% phone if all goes well. And that's kind of how it played out. So there's, from the West Coast, the basic strategy at the very beginning of the contest is to start on 40 and 80, because we're just right around sunrise in Arizona at 1200 Zulu. So you can still work Asia and Pacific on 80. That's what we normally do. But this year, I decided to do things a little bit differently because of the great propagation that we had. So I did start on 40, but I also started on 20. So I just skipped 80 entirely that first go around. Obviously, I could get to 80 at the end of the contest, which is what I ended up doing. But I played it a little bit differently than I've ever done before. And then normally we stay on 40 meters from out here for the first hour and a half, maybe even up to 2 hours. But we ended up having the same issue we had in the last CW contest, where the Chinese radar came online. It was right around 12:30 Zulu, so half an hour into the contest, the radar comes on, and that really kills the rate. You can still work the loud stations, no problem, but anybody that's a little bit weaker, that's calling you on 40 meters, they just get drowned out by the radar. And so that really dictates what you're going to do. And so in a very unusual move from the West Coast, I abandoned 40 meters 30 minutes into the contest. Now I'm on 20 and 15. Now, luckily, this is the year to do that, because 15 was wide open the entire contest. Like all 24 hours is open somewhere. So that really played into my hands nicely. And I probably would not have moved that quickly without the radar, but I'm glad it was there, because it forced my hand to do it, and it turned out to be the right strategy for that first hour.
And I spent a lot of time on the weekend. I tried to go to sideband every chance I could. Kept hoping, like, there's got to be more rate here, or mostly just to expand the population of people that I could work. Because, after a while, you start running out of guys on CW. But I when I first turned on the radio a half hour before the contest, 15 was unbelievable. Signals were incredible from Europe. And so kind of normally I would start on CW and just run there because that's where all the people are. But the signals were so loud, I said, I've got to do sideband. So I started the contest on 15 sideband. And it was pretty good. I had guys calling me, and so I had some rate. And then I lost my spot. And I could not find another frequency. And I found lots of places that sounded clear, and I would call CQ, and, it's like Dan said, if you don't get spotted, there's so many people who don't tune around anymore. They just click on spot. So if you don't get spotted, you can do a lot of empty CQing. But it just felt like the Europeans were hearing each other so well. The sporadicy was happening, so they were so loud to each other that it just was hard for them to hear us. And so I kept retreating back to CW, and CW was always possible to run, guys. But phone, it just was kind of hit or miss. And that seemed to be true all day. I didn't really look at the solar indices the whole time, but the bands really got good after our dark, after our sunset. And the problem is we have a 3-hour overlap with Europe for mutual darkness. And so as soon as the sun went down here, I'm like, I got to work 40, 80, and 160 and get as many QSOs and multipliers as I can. I have to ignore 15 and 20, even though they were open, some incredible things over the pole to Asia and so on. So finally at 0300, I come back to 20, and it was amazing. It was like we had Europe. It was just like ARL phone was, where we had all these Europeans all to ourselves, and the band was very quiet, so there was no QRM, and had some pretty good sideband rates on 20 in the middle of the night. And I would go to 15 a couple of times, and yes, there were signals there. The band was open all over the place, but there weren't very many people or new people to work. So, but to kind of answer your question, you would think rates could be faster on sideband, but this contest is just, for some reason, works out. It's more CW. There's more CW guys that are active and more people that are doing CW, and so that was always the place you would go, and you just try to work phone opportunistically.
Bill, I'd like to pull you into the conversation. Did you have a chance to operate this past weekend?
I did. I had some big operating plans this weekend, and I was going to try to push pretty hard. But Friday night, I was testing everything out, just making sure everything was okay, and I found a problem with one of my amplifiers on the second radio. And being the engineer I am, I decided to take it apart and figure out the problem, and I did. I figured it. I'm like, okay, there's a relay that was bad, and I decided I was gonna replace it. I went back home. I was actually operating at one of my good friend NW6P's house, and I decided to go home and go get some parts, and I'll come back and I'll fix this amplifier. And I go home, I get the parts, I get my soldering iron, my desoldering tool, and I eventually come back, take it apart, and manage to pull the pad off of this, where this relay went, and that was the end of that amplifier's ability to run. So I was sort of stuck with, throughout the weekend with one full power side and one low power side. And I just sort of made the best of it. By the time I got out of there and sort of figured out what was wrong with the second amplifier, and how I sort of made the problem worse, it was 1:45 a.m. I actually came back and started operating at 5, and I just didn't have a lot of energy left for the whole contest. So in such a situation, you don't give up. What you do is you get on, you have fun, you contact a bunch of people. I saw a lot of the same things that Dan's mentioning. I had actually talked to Dan a couple days ago about what do I do at this station? What's sort of the right strategy? And as soon as that over the horizon radar started on 40 meters, I knew that it was time to start moving up the bands, and that was exactly the right choice.
So I'm curious, Bill, when you had the problem with the amp, did you consider even for a moment just going low power?
I did consider that, and I thought, kind of looked at the categories, and I decided that it just wouldn't have been a competitive entry, and I would have just enjoyed myself if I had at least one working amplifier that was at full power and I was able to get into Europe. I didn't quite know just how strong the propagation was going to be on 15 all weekend. I actually, thinking back on it, that might have been exactly the right choice.
What call sign were you using?
I was using my own W9KKN. I don't think we worked, Randy.
No, we didn't.
No.
I was just saying, you were on?
Yeah, I was. Exactly.
So one of the things WRTC qualifying gives maximum points if you do single op, not assisted. And so I decided to do that, even though most of my contesting activity, especially DX contests for the last few years, have been assisted. And I was just reminded, it's like, you're just so blind when you don't have all these spots coming in and everything. So when the contest is over and I'm seeing all these scores come in on 3830, I'm like, that guy was on? I never heard him, or I worked him once. I didn't know he was serious. And so you really start to realize how much that you miss. And you could see it on the scoreboard because you could see these guys that were assisted had a lot of multipliers. So you knew the multipliers were out there, which makes you want to double down and go tuning some more and try to find them. But at the same time, it's all about rate. You still need all the cues.
And I was in exactly the same situation. I really wanted to do this contest unassisted. I wanted to get a lot more time just spinning the dial and trying to do that balancing act of finding multipliers and such. And I actually think I'm really glad that I did it because I hadn't tried that in a while, and it was it's definitely a very different style of operating. It's a lot more challenging in a lot of ways, but I actually found it pretty rewarding. Just finding multipliers and scanning the band and trying to keep two radios active as much as I possibly could.
Randy, we've often talked about how DX contests favor the East Coast, and I'm presuming that's the case with the ARU.
Well, yeah, because of the headquarter station multipliers, there's a lot more multipliers available on every band. There's probably 20 European headquarter stations, and you can work most of them on at least 4 bands and maybe 5, and in some cases I work GR2HQ on 6 bands. And that's a little more challenging out west. And so, yes, it does mean that the East Coast guys should always win, but it doesn't always happen.
So let's dig into that. Not to raise a sore point, but it appears as though the West Coast guy, Dan N6MJ, may have exceeded your point total, Randy, but I don't want to start a rumor.
Well, that's what the score rumors show.
I worked really hard because, I've done pretty well in the last couple of DX contests from Arizona, and the one guy that's always been in front of me is K5ZD, and so I'm like, oh man. He started talking about this casual operation he's going to do, so I'm like, yeah, that's not true. He's going to see that scoreboard and, go hot and heavy all 24 hours. I knew that was going to happen. And it was kind of funny because I actually was kind of glued to that scoreboard this time. It always depends on the contest. I don't always look at it. This time I was looking at it the whole time. And I'm sure Randy remembers this moment as well, but there was a point like around 2300, 00 Zulu, when he went to the low bands. And I had a pretty good lead up until that point. And then all of a sudden he starts pounding in those European mults. And he actually overtook me for about 30, 45 minutes, whatever it was. But that was like super motivation for me because at that point I'm still waiting for darkness so I can go to 40 and 80 and work the multipliers that I'm going to get. So I knew I was going to potentially catch up to him, but I was worried that he's going to work too many multipliers that I couldn't, keep up. But as the time came, my rate stayed really high, so I was able to generate the queues, and there were a lot of DX queues. Of course, those are worth more points. You get the 5 points for DX, and that also led into a nice multiplier total for myself. And shortly, I don't know, maybe around 0100, whenever it was, I finally took over Randy again and then never looked back, So I have to say, it did feel good this time to actually beat him. And I don't know, at least according to 3830 right now, for the single operator, all band, mixed mode, high power, I'm currently standing in first place for USA and VE. So very happy about that.
So Dan, how much of your log was actually Asia stations compared to Randy's? Have you guys actually taken a look to see how that your split direction changed the game for you a little bit?
I haven't looked at Randy's log, but I'm almost guaranteed the only reason why I was able to keep up in multipliers is there are more Asian multipliers in this contest than most because again you get your headquarters, you get all these different zones for UA0 has a ton of zones, and those are easy for us and not quite as easy for Randy. I bet you if we go and compare multipliers, I'm certain that my Asian multipliers, of course, are going to be more than his, but I think that's the difference in this contest, is that there's so many more Asian multipliers that it kind of helps me keep up on the European front. Because I got really great Europe on 15, really great Europe on 20, decent Europe on 40. I probably worked at least 15 to 20 headquarter stations out of Europe on 40, so that was all good. I knew that I'd have to kind of stay close on 10. I spent a lot of time listening on 10, and it was all skew path Europeans, which is normal this time of year. And the path was there. I worked about 8 or 9 guys. Of course, it's not a lot, but those are 8 or 9 multipliers from Europe that I was able to pad in. And then, in addition to all that, I'm focusing on Asia the entire contest. The great thing about ND7K is that he's got gigantic stacks in both directions. And so on 15 meters, just for example, even though in the morning, normally you'd think you're only going to run Europe, I was running both Europe and JA. And, I've got 7/7 to JA, and I've got 7/7/7 to Europe, all at the same time. And have the same abilities on 20, and even the same abilities on 40. And I've really focused hard on JA. And the nice thing about that split direction is, the rate's not always going to be best to JA, but you're just, bringing them in at the same time as the European guys, and that's how you are able to keep the rate and then also focus on that target area, even though the rate's not great over there.
I had the scoreboard up on the screen the whole time, and yes, I was watching Dan. He got his usual 2B SIQ start, so he had a lot of QSOs, but what surprised me was how many multipliers he had right from the start. And so it did take a long time to slowly catch up, and I didn't realize I'd actually passed you for a while. I just assumed you were always kind of out front, but I ended up really competing more with N2NT and AA4GA, which was in R3, or which was Nate in R3X in disguise. And but it's just the motivation. I mean, this contest, you get into the wee hours and you're just like, it's summer, it's hot, because the air conditioning couldn't possibly keep up with the amplifiers, and having the scoreboard there just kept me like, okay, well, I got to keep going. And I was catching up a little bit, and I was just thinking, well, if we had one more day, I think I could get them. But I was really glad when we were done. But by the way, just say, I had 74% of my QSOs was Europe, which is very normal. It's kind of the average number that we would have from here. And I only worked, out of 3,150 QSOs, I only worked 537 contacts in the USA. And most of those were probably Zone 8. So this is a contest where there just isn't that much USA activity. It is very European oriented, and it's hard to tell how Asia activity is from here, even though they were coming in all the time. It was amazing. I ended up with one antenna pointed north all the time on 20 and 15, because stuff would just call in at these random times, and it's all usually good multipliers out that way, so you wanted to attract those guys if you could.
So Randy, it might be fair to say that you've been somewhat of a reluctant 2B SIQ operator, but I see you were doing that during this contest. I'm curious how much you operated 2B SIQ.
Well, I'm not reluctant. I'm just unskilled and therefore incapable. So there's a difference.
Trying to give you a pass.
But the station is set up for it. I have all the software and everything. I've tried it in fits and starts at times, and usually what happens is I'll end up with too many guys calling on one of the radios, so things are a little unbalanced. You get all out of sync. And it's really hard in a contest like WPX where you have serial numbers. But this was a zone contest, so pretty much you knew what you were going to get, much like Worldwide. And also the rates the pilots weren't that intense. So I actually had a 2-hour period, solid 2 hours, where I'm running on 15 and 20 at the same time, doing the 2B SIQ thing. And I also realized I probably need to send a little faster, because I was at 34 words a minute on both sides. And it was kind of like, I was always, there was always that little time delay for one side to finish sending before you started sending the call of the next guy. And the Europeans are pretty hyper, so that little bit of delay would often have them start calling again at the same time I'm responding to them. But I was just so happy, because wow, I did 2 whole hours in a row of this. I see why these guys really like this, but you got to be in a very special place where you've got guys coming in, calling you in an orderly fashion. So actually having less pileup was a good thing. But the combined rate was great. In the whole weekend, I only had 3 hours that were less than 100. And so that was, even though a lot of times it didn't feel like I was going very fast, in the end it worked out.
And Dan, despite the fact that you did really well, are there things that you would have done differently?
Maybe. So since the propagation was so good on 15 meters throughout the day, 20 meters really suffered. It wasn't open anywhere. And that kind of didn't lead to a lot of opportunities for 2B SIQ, for a good portion of the day, probably 4 or 5 hours where I wasn't doing much 2B SIQ. I was more doing search and pounce on 10, because at least from Arizona, the propagation on 10 meters wasn't runnable. You can work guys, but there was no rate there either. So I was more focusing on doing one radio, tuning, like doing old-fashioned SO2R on the second radio. And so I kind of left the third radio alone in this contest. I think I worked maybe 3 or 4 guys on it in the entire 24 hours. And there's always an opportunity for more of that. And so that's the only thing that I could have pushed a little bit harder, is that third radio. But other than that, I felt pretty good about all the choices that I made. They all seemed to work out pretty well for me.
I noticed the same thing, and I was really counting on this, Dan, because I could tell there was kind of only one band open at a time, and so I figured that was slowing you down a little bit. But this is a contest where 2BSIQ is great for CW. Very hard to do work where you've got sideband in one ear and CW in the other. That was the part I found the most interesting. There were a couple of times where I'm trying to either run guys on phone while I'm tuning around in CW or vice versa, and they just have different rhythms and different things that you listen to, and sometimes the switching and what button you push is maybe slightly different. So it makes the contest a lot more interesting, but it limits your ability to really multitask in terms of running at the same time.
I don't know, Randy. I've almost found the opposite because in some cases, when I'm doing, I mean, not necessarily 2BSIQ with phone and CW, but SO2R anyway, they're very different. I guess parts of the brain that are engaged doing that. And what's nice is that they're sort of different sounds and different languages, and it's a lot easier to, it's a lot harder to get lost because you always sort of know that I'm talking to this person and I'm listening for the CW on this side. And I actually did that for quite a bit of time this weekend. I spent one radio I was running CW, the other I was calling guys on sideband, and while I didn't have the score that either of you did, it was something that I actually found pretty reasonable to do for quite a while.
Yeah, and I agree with Bill. For me, it's one of the easier things to do is to do sideband and CW at the same time. And Bill hit it on the head for me too. It's basically, it's so different that it's easy to focus on the one thing versus the other. If I know I'm working phone on one radio, I can very easily tune my brain just into that and just ignore the CW on the other side because it's totally different, right? So even doing 2BSIQ with phone and CW at the same time, to me that's easier than doing phone and phone because phone and phone is the hardest. Phone and CW is the second hardest, and then CW and CW is actually the easiest. But it to me, just having that difference, and it does have that different cadence, so that does throw things off a little bit. And one thing that Randy pointed out, he said he was sending 34 words a minute. That's almost where you need to be, but you have to kind of like play around with your message lengths and stuff. Like I have 3 different kinds of CQs on CW, and it's all dependent on what's happening on the other side. I have a really short CQ, then I have a little bit longer one, and then I have a long CQ. And as long as you have those 3 things going and you're able to control that, you can get by with 34 words a minute. I was more around 35, 36. At the very beginning, I was like at 38. Always the higher the speed, the better the sync is. But you start to, especially when you're working guys in Asia, which is one of my bread and butters from the West Coast, they don't send quite as fast as the European guys. So I was slowing down a little bit in the same range that Randy was, about 35 or so. But I was able to compensate by changing the message lengths and do it that way.
So what do you find, the whole day, 2BSIQ is great, and in the worldwide it seems to work out that the more QSOs you make, the multipliers find you. But in this contest where the headquarter stations are so important, they tend to not be tuning around as much, so you're almost forced to do a lot more listening, especially on the low bands, because you got to go find them. And this is where not having the cluster was really an issue, right? Because if you didn't happen to be on 75 or 80 meters or 160 at the right time when they were calling CQ, you would just miss a guy. But did you do more tuning than normal?
I did. And I did the same contest, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago from Tim's, and that was a different beast because that one I was able to do 2BSIQ the entire time, and I really focused on that third radio to tune around. But this time, the rate was so high on 20 or 15, wherever I was at, that tuning around actually made a lot of sense a lot of the time. It's just totally different than like a normal contest for me. I was looking at my rate sheet, and one thing that I noticed was, I started on 40 meters around 0130 Zulu, which is about an hour before sunset in Arizona. And in the 0100 hour and the 0200 hour, I was just searching counts on 40 plus running on the other radio. And I only had I think it was 26 cues of the 1 hour and 27 the other. But those were super, super important cues, as Randy knows, because that's when I was working those European headquarter molts. They're not as easy to work from the West Coast, but they're certainly workable. But you have to spend some time. You got to find them first, and then hope they hear you. And plus all the other, weird zone molts from Europe and whatnot. So I spent a lot of time focusing on that, and while the rate wasn't high, I know my multiplier total went way up, and that was a big thing in this contest. And I always think back to, you know, what can you learn from this to also bring into the actual WRTC uh, competition? Because that's, my goal. Randy's got that goal. I know it's Bill's goal too. Maybe it's a long-term goal, but I know he's going to be there at some point. And so even now, I've done WRTC 5 times, but I still want to learn more, right? And so two of the things that came to my mind that stuck with me that I'm going to try and remember when we're in England in 2 years from now. One thing that Randy mentioned, and I also heard one of the operators from K3 Aller mention that they started on phone at the beginning of the contest. And both of them mentioned that they had really great rate. And all the other WRTCs, I've never started on phone. I've always started on CW, but I'm going to keep it in the back of my mind that maybe starting on phone is not a bad idea because you're going to be the only guy up there that's doing WRTC, and maybe that's the time to actually get good rate on phone. And then the other thing that really struck a chord with me that I'm definitely keeping in the back of my mind for 2 years from now is there was an opening that was reported on the East Coast between East Coast and Europe where in the middle of the night in the East Coast, it was like 0700 until the end of the contest. There weren't a lot of guys on during that opening, but I did see some reports of some guys that were actually on 10 meters right in the middle of the night, and they were able to work Europeans during that time. And that, gets my mind going like, oh, well, I gotta really keep an eye on that when I'm over there because that could lead to additional multipliers. And one of the key things in WRTC is multipliers on 10 meters and 80 meters. So just going back real quickly to WRTC 2014, one of the key things that happened in that contest was that Chris, my partner, KL9A, he checked 10 meters right before in the last hour of WRTC that year. And not a lot of the other teams were on 10 meters, but he was on there. And he knocked off a good 10, 15 multipliers that a lot of other teams didn't get. So, that was a key for our win in that year. And I'm hoping that, that knowledge will help us out going forward in 2 years from now.
Yeah, there's always a lot more sporadic in the summer in Europe, it seems like, than there is here. And so there'll often be all kinds of stuff going on 10 meters. And to us, it's like, the band's dead or whatever. But occasionally that sporadic will be some double hop, and then suddenly in that last couple hours of the contest, these things will pop in, and it's where you get the multipliers. There was a couple of times EA1X was super loud, EF4HQ was loud for a long time on 10. But to talk about starting on phone, Dan, I think one of the reasons for WRTC everybody starts on CW. It's a lot different when you're running 100 watts and a tribe 130 feet than what we're used to having at home. So that has something to do with it. I have to admit, during the weekend, I kept having flashbacks to last year because it's kind of hard to believe, but it was just a year ago that we were sitting in Italy doing this contest, and conditions last year were pretty fantastic between Europe and the USA, and I remember hearing K1LZ for hours and hours on 10 meter CW. So I kept thinking, well, the flux is so high, this band's got to open, but for some reason MUF just gets past 15 and it doesn't quite really work. It doesn't really happen on 10 in the summertime except by sporadic E, and we just didn't have enough of it.
Yeah, you're just not getting those FOF2 openings or any of that stuff. It's all these very random tiny little openings. You know what else surprised me about this weekend though was just in how good shape the low bands actually were. I mean there wasn't a terrible amount of noise except for that early Chinese radar. The KP was like 1 or 2 all weekend. I mean, it was predicted to be a lot worse, but guys were very workable on 40, even 80. I mean, I didn't do a lot on 160, but it was. I was pleasantly surprised by how much worse it could have been.
And the band stayed open late almost like wintertime. I was working guys 2 hours or more after their sunrise from Europe, and I even went up to 40 phone for a while, and there were, unlike the usual contest where it's like this big screaming mosh pit, there were all kinds of empty spaces, and so I called CQ at one point. And there are a lot of guys, I won't say a lot, but there are a number of guys who do phone only in IARU, and they're desperate for people to show up to work. So once I got spotted on 40 phone, I had a couple of pretty good 45 minutes or so worth of QSOs, and then it's just like that. You just run out of guys. It's like, okay, got to go somewhere else now. I did have one problem during the weekend. I've got some kind of computer problem where at random times, the USB port that connects to the SO2R controller locks up. And of course, when that happens, I lose all my radio frequency information. I lose my ability for the computer to send. And what I've discovered, because it always happens during a contest, and I don't have a lot of time for messing around, is the only way to restore it is I have to reboot the computer. And not just reboot it, I have to power it off and turn it back on again. And that happened to me 5 times this weekend. And at one point, I had a bunch of guys call me, and so I'm logging on paper while I'm trying to navigate the computer through shutting down everything and then getting it to restart. And when I talk about powering off the computer, I don't mean just hitting shut down and waiting for it to shut down and you hit the button to start. I have to physically disconnect the power from the computer and plug it back in to get the thing going. So it's a circus. But the problem is when you have a thing like this, where I think it's almost got to be RF related, because it seems to happen when I hit the QSL button or something and it starts sending. So you'll work 6 hours in a row, nothing happens, and then all of a sudden this will happen once. And so it's going to be very hard to figure out the root cause, because it only happens during contests, and then that's when you have the least amount of time to figure it out. But it's got to be a hardware thing in the USB. But you have to carry on, like you said. Even if stuff's broken, must win contest. To quote Chris.
So, gentlemen, you've had your summer break now. We're going to be back on schedule every week. Hopefully, you'll all be able to make it. But I do appreciate you taking time tonight. My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. I've been talking to Bill, W9KKN, Dan, N6MJ, and Randy, K5ZD. Thank you for joining us.